Time for the 18th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Area Representative for Darrell Spring Wim, Kelvin Morris, will lay a motion based on the position that on March 23rd, the 15th sitting was adjourned based on the advice that the House could not be convened in the clerk's absence. The minority leader maintains that this was in violation of the standing orders and a flagrant breach of the law. The motion will call on the House to conduct an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the issue. Even before we get into the debate, there's highly anticipated questions for oral and written answers. This Thursday, May 25th from 1:30 p.m., we head back to the House for the 18th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. As usual, you have only two options. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, just don't miss it.
We humbly beseech you to grant to all our members the light and guidance of your Holy Spirit, that we may wisely take counsel together and come to such decisions as shall promote your glory and the well-being of all our citizens in this our land, so that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be enjoyed by all people. Grant this for the sake of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Members, you may be seated.
Oath of allegiance of a new member. Announcements by the presiding officer.
Honorable members, I have received requests for leave of absence from today's sitting from Assemblyman Nigel Tate, Member for Signal Hill Patience Hill, Councillor Tashira Boris, Assemblyman Trevor James, Member for Scarborough Mongrace. The leaves are granted.
Assembly bills sent back from Cabinet. Assembly laws brought back from Parliament. Petitions, papers.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I stand to lay the following papers for Tobago House of Assembly monthly budget report as at the end of January 2023, Tobago House of Assembly monthly budget report as at the end of February 2023, and Tobago House of Assembly monthly budget report as at the end of March 2023.
Presentation of reports from Dispute Resolution Commission, select committees. Chief Secretary's questions. Questions to secretaries.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, there are 11 questions for oral and 13 questions for written responses. The executive is prepared to answer questions for oral answers number 56, 57, 59, 62, 65, and 74. And we are requesting that questions number 54, 63, 64, 72, and 73 for oral answers to be deferred to the next sitting due to the absence of the secretaries from today's sitting. Questions number 66, 67, 70, and 71 for written responses should be circulated in the minutes from the last sitting. However, we are requesting to have questions number 60, 68, and 69 for written responses to be deferred due to the absence of the secretaries. Questions for written response number 77 is attached to the minutes from the last sitting and would be circulated at this sitting. However, questions number 75, 76, 78, 79, and 80 would be submitted for circulation at the next sitting. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Minority Leader.
Question number 56 to the Secretary of the Division of Education, Research and Technology.
Can the Secretary explain the circumstances surrounding the extended closure of the St. Andrew's Anglican School? The health and safety of our students and teachers are of paramount importance to the Division of Education, Research and Technology. And as such, it is imperative that all is done to preserve same. The St. Andrew's Anglican Primary School is one of the state-assisted schools located in Codler Hall that in recent weeks was closed by the Public Health Department. An infestation of rodents was discovered, and through intervention of the Public Health Unit, measures were put in place to address the issues identified. The design of the building, housekeeping practices, and conditions of adjacent lots contributed to rodents establishing a colony at the facility. Surveillance of adjacent premises, including the Scarborough Methodist Primary School, revealed no infestation, and as such, maintenance operations are in effect. The St. Andrew's Anglican Primary School was ordered closed on Thursday, 16 February 2023 by the Public Health Services Department of the Tobago House of Assembly for 7 days initially. This closure was as a result of a visit to the school by the rodent evaluator, Mr. Sheldon Collette, and Health Control Officer, Ms. Elaine Cipriani, who indicated that the school was infested by rodents, which placed the health and safety of staff and students at risk. On Wednesday, 22nd February 2023, Ms. Deborah George Carmichael, OSM Inspector 1, visited St. Andrew's Anglican and conducted an inspection of the premises. On Thursday, 23rd February 2023, Mrs. George Carmichael issued a prohibition notice pursuant to Section 74(1) of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, Chapter 88, 08. The prohibition notice prevented the school from functioning until all requirements of the notice were fulfilled and a re-inspection of the school was done by the USH Inspector 1. Preventative measures after the infestation were determined by the division and the actions were taken, dated. I am going to go to the last set of actions. There's several actions, over 30 actions. I'm going to go on the last set of actions. On the 29th of the 3rd, Standard 5 students, having been relocated to the John Dial Multipurpose Facility, wrote the SEA exams without incident. On the 4th of the 4th, sanitation at the school began. On the 10th of the 4th, sanitation at the school was completed. On the 12th of the 4th, prohibition notice by public health was lifted. And on the 17th of the 4th, school reopened and regular classes resumed at the St. Andrews Anglican. Minority Leader is free to have the report. I have it here. A copy can be made available to him. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Supplemental.
Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary indicate if there was any correspondence coming from the school with respect to this issue and what was the date of that correspondence?
Member.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. The Division of Education, after receiving a call from principal, visited St. Andrews Anglican on the 14th of the 2nd, 2023, and met with the Vice Principal and staff on issues of refusal to work and received documentation on the issues with the rats or rodents. On the 14th of the 2nd, the SS3 and administrator also received those reports, and on the 15th of the 2nd, they had arrangements started to have public health visit the school. So that's the correspondence.
Supplemental.
Can the Secretary indicate whether there were any previous correspondence prior to those referred to on the 14th? Were there any communication between the school and the division with respect to possible rodents, etc.?
Member.
Madam Presiding Officer, I am uncertain at this time. That question was not on the order paper, and so I can furnish the Minority Leader with that response. What I know is that this is not the first time the school has been infested with rodents, as told to me by the principal.
Minority Leader, question 57.
Question number 57 to the Secretary of Education.
Secretary of Education, Research and Technology.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. With respect to the July-August school repair program and its various phases, can the Secretary provide answers to the following questions? A, whether the projects for which contracts were rewarded are all now completed. B, whether the projects incurred any variations in cost. And C, whether there are outstanding payments due to contractors in respect to work done for these projects. A, answer no, there are several projects ongoing, and I have in front of me 5. 1, Avicon Services, School, Mason Hall Secondary, project status 95% complete. Item 2, Avicon Services, Mason Hall Secondary, and I should have indicated first item, Block B and K, second item, Block J, 95% complete. Avicon again, Mason Hall Secondary, Block C and H, 95% complete. And the 4th, Raldon Construction, Scarborough Secondary School, 95% complete. The reasons for 3 of Avicon, ongoing works, and for Raldon, snagging. Response to Part B, whether the projects incurred any variations in cost, and I have 7 projects that incurred variation in cost. I am going to give you the schools, table piece government, variation sum, 32,675. Speyside Secondary, 2 sums, one for 131,208, and the second for 65,250. 4th, Lansamy Methodist, 50,000. 5th, Buku Government Primary, 38,100. 6th, Signal Hill Secondary, and I have 2 for Signal Hill Secondary. First sum, 51,660, and second sum, 11,500. C, whether there are outstanding payments due to contractors in respect to work done for these projects. Outstanding payments to the school repair program, inclusive of outstanding variation, is in the sum of 10,450,354.52 cents. The SRP works, 10,830,748, and the variation works of 380,393.48, giving that total of 453.54 and I have with me every contractor's name and the sum owed. Majority of them, it's the 10% retention. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Supplemental minority.
Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary explain with respect?
Minority, hold on. Members are advised and persons in the gallery that all phones are supposed to be on silent or turned off. Thank you. Continue, minority.
Madam Presiding Officer, I quite recall in this very house a similar question asked, and this house was told at the time Scarborough Secondary was the only school outstanding. So can the Secretary explain to this house how now we are hearing 5 other schools in addition to Scarborough Secondary?
Member?
5 other schools in reference to what, Minority Leader? Can you be specific?
You supplied this house with an update on the school repair program, and at that time, you told this house that the only school at the time that was outstanding was Scarborough Secondary.
Madam Presiding Officer,
Member?
that information I had, Avicon had not yet started on the school repair program. So that information I'm certain the Minority Leader has does not have Avicon as beginning the project. As a matter of fact, that was one of the issues I had to clarify when we had that issue raised about the Trinidad contractor in the first place. So, Minority Leader, Avicon Services Limited, as I said before, 3 projects at Mason Hall Secondary and the 1 Raldon Construction at Scarborough Secondary, snagging 95%, and Avicon 3 projects, 95%.
Minority supplemental.
Madam Presiding Officer, again, I repeat, based on the information supplied to us via written questions and the works that were completed, Avicon was included on Mason Hall, and at that time, we were not told that Mason Hall had outstanding work. So can the Secretary kindly outline to this House how between then where we had the issue with only Scarborough being the school with outstanding works and now where we are hearing about this Mason Hall, can the Secretary explain what is the difference for that kind of report to this Honorable House?
Member?
Madam Presiding Officer, as I said before, Avicon Services Limited, who at that point in time when the issue of the Trinidad contractor came up, I was able to say that the works had not even begun because this product had to be brought into the country. I would like the Minority Leader to look back at his documents that I provided him with and look at the status of Avicon, where they were in terms of start date, and then we can have this conversation. As I have right now, 95% works ongoing, and Raldon Construction, Scarborough Sec, 95%. Snagging is the reason for incompletion. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Madam Presiding Officer, we are being told by the Honorable, the Secretary, that with respect to outstanding payments, most of those payments are with respect to variations as well as retentions. The information that I have before me is that there are a number of contractors still waiting on 40%, some 20%, but a number of contractors outstanding. So I want the Secretary to kindly explain what is the difference, what is accounting for the difference in the contractor's experience, where they are saying monies are owed to them, and the Secretary's report where she's saying the only monies she really owed to these contractors are retention and variation.
Members, this is not a debate. I'm going to allow the Secretary for Education, Research and Technology to furnish the minority with a complete document for...
Madam Presiding, I mean, I could stand here and call out every contractor's name, but I have it.
My member, I will allow you to provide or furnish the minority with a report, a total report of the information he seeks. Moving on. Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question number 59 to the Secretary, Division of Education, Research and Technology.
Secretary for Education, Research and Technology.
In relation to the position of Technical Advisor in the Division of Education, Research and Technology, can the Secretary indicate the following? A, 1A, if there is a Technical Advisor engaged in the division, the answer is yes. B, if yes, can the Secretary outline the recruitment process utilized, the individual hired in the position, and the qualifications of the said hired individual? The response is Ms. Ann Natasha Second is the Technical Advisor of the Division of Education, Research and Technology. Ms. Ann Natasha Second holds the following qualifications. A Bachelor of Arts, double major in Literatures in English and Geography attained from the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies, Jamaica, July 1st, 2000, through a National Scholarship for Geography Teachers. 2, postgraduate diploma in education attained at the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies, August 17, 2007. 3, Masters of Business Administration with specialization in marketing management attained through Sital College of Tertiary Studies, Trinidad and the Australian Institute of Business, March 2015. 4, a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing attained from the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago, June 10, 2019. The manuscript produced is the first novel, Sati Ita, a representation of female triumph over various forms of trauma. 5, currently completing a doctorate in educational leadership with specialization in school systems management. Her current research is an ambitious mixed methods research study on the relationship between principal and school accountability practices and student outcomes of the primary level. She has obtained a grade A in all 16 of the taught courses, namely Technological Leadership in Education, Research Processes, Digital Literacy, Qualitative Research Methods, and Data Analysis for Educational Practitioners, Leaders in a Diverse Education Environment, Trends, Issues, and Challenges in General Education, Managing Educational Resources, Human Capital Management, Quantitative Research Methods and Data Analysis for Educational Practitioners, Legal Issues in Education, a Caribbean Perspective, Leading and Managing Change in Educational Organizations, Educational Policy and Program Evaluation, Organizational Systems Theory and Context in Caribbean Education, Perspectives of Teaching and Learning in the Educational System, Contemporary Approaches to Education, Issues in the Caribbean, and Governance and Accountability in the Educational System, a Caribbean Perspective. Additional certificates in personal and professional life includes Health and Family Life Education Master Training Course from the Ministry of Education in 2015, Train the Trainer Workshop at Lockjack Graduate School of Business, April 2008, Certificate in Teaching and Learning as it relates to language from the University of the West Indies in August 2001, Certificate in Administrative Senior Leadership Staff and Volunteers from the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, Western Hemisphere. Work experience. 26 years in secondary level education, commencing as Assistant Teacher 3 at the Signal Hill Secondary School, then promoted to Teacher 3 at the Bishop's High School, Tobago, became Head of Department, Modern Studies at Bishop's High School, Tobago, and then Acting Vice Principal, Bishop's High School, until her date of employment with the Division of Education, Research and Technology. Subjects taught across her career include Geography, English Literature, English Language, Literatures in English, Communication Studies, Sociology, and Caribbean Studies. 12 years experience as a part-time lecturer at several local tertiary level institutions, namely the University of the Southern Caribbean, St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies, the Tobago Open campus of UWI, and the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And then there's some additional services, which I'm going to omit right now. Accomplishments at the Division of Team member for the Scarborough Secondary School Design and User Brief Development. 2, team member Special Needs Committee to achieve effective inclusive education. 3, team lead for the ECC sector in the preparation and successful response to the National Parliamentary Inquiry into an examination of the regulation and administration of public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago at the Joint Select Committee's Parliamentary Inquiry. 4, team lead of the Hybrid Education Committee to design, implement, and evaluate policy direction on effective hybrid education capacity, building from ECC to tertiary level. 5, instrumental in the management of the project impacts phase 1 and the planning of phase 2 and cycle 2, focus on remedial and accelerated learning and student development. 6, design and implementation of training and developmental policy of DIRTEC in alignment with the strategic direction of the administration. 7, led the strategic planning process that has already brought about greater collaboration among staff and the redesigning of the organizational chart to streamline services for improved quality and delivery. Final phase involves Secretary and Administrator of DIRTEC taking the discussion in a consultative phase. Ms. Second first came to DIRTEC as advisor to the Secretary of Education, Research and Technology, but it was recognized by the leadership team at the division that her competencies, skills, experiences, and commitment would be better utilized in the capacity of technical advisor to the division. The internal promotion reflects precedent set by her predecessor, Dr. Verlene Bob Lewis, who was also internally promoted as the division's first technical advisor, having been deemed overqualified for the office of CEC. The decision is a pragmatic and cost-effective
Member,
one. Yes?
I think you have answered the question.
I have?
Yes, I believe
Okay.
so.
Well, you know how the thing goes with the minority leader, so I'm ensuring that I did.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
In its totality, thank you. Minority. Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. So I'm just confirming, Madam Presiding Officer, since the member did not complete the recruitment process, is it that the member who is, or the person who is now employed as technical advisor did not go through a recruitment process where the position was advertised, persons were invited to submit resumes, an evaluation process occurred, and then someone was selected? I'm just confirming.
I'm hearing many questions, Minority Councillor.
I am confirming what the recruitment process is.
Thank you. Member?
I responded to that in my overexpression of the question.
Can you reiterate for elucidation of the councillor?
We were asking if the position was advertised.
No, it was not.
Supplemental Minority Councillor?
Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary indicate the remuneration package associated with this position?
No, it's not a part of the question.
It's a supplemental, I'll allow. Does it have a remuneration? Member?
Yes. Yeah, it's not a part of the question, Minority Councillor.
Madam Presiding Officer, I'm asking a follow-up which you allowed. Can the member indicate what is the remuneration package for the technical
Member,
advisor?
will the answer be provided? Can you provide the Minority Councillor with the answer?
Right? Not at this time.
Listen, questions answer debate.
Madam
And I'm
Presiding
asking all members to observe the processes, the protocols, and the decorum of this House. Thank you.
Madam Presiding Officer, I would be pleased to present Minority Councillor. With that, I want to be specific about the allowances.
Thank you. Minority Councillor? Minority Leader. Question 62.
Question 62 to the Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance, Trade and Economy.
Secretary of Finance, Trade and Economy.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. The answer to that question, I believe, is resident with the Clerk of the House. The last time I checked, short-term employment requires covering approval from a line secretary. I have not seen anything of that sort. I've also not seen at the Executive Council any notes for additional staffing at the Office of the Minority Leader, and therefore I will ask the Minority Leader to direct that question to the Clerk of the House.
Supplemental.
Madam Presiding Officer, given that this matter is a long-standing issue, about 1 year and 3 to 4 months, and given that we met very early with the Honorable Chief Secretary on this matter, and he gave us in that meeting certain assurances, can the Chief Secretary kindly explain to us what are the circumstances upon whereby he's no longer interested in following up on those assurances given to the Office of the Minority with respect to the formalization of the positions that were outstanding?
Secretary for Finance.
Madam Presiding Officer, at that initial meeting, I made it clear to the Minority Leader, while I believe that there was some additional staffing needed for his office, and in that said meeting, I disagreed with the then Chief Administrator and the Clerk of the House with regards to the selection of janitorial services. In fact, the desire at the time was to extend janitorial services from this office to his office, and I was of the firm position where that is concerned, that must be a separate entity. Since that meeting, Madam Presiding Officer, there has been no formal agreement on what the staffing will be, how many they should be, until I recognize that people were hired already and were in fact being paid. Given that they were hired and being paid without any proper public public service regulation processes in place, the Minority Leader should direct his question to the person who took the authority to do such employment.
Follow-up, Minority.
Given that the Minority Leader inherited a payment regime, a structure that was also one where the Chief Secretary benefited from, because they were, in that era, they were able to get an improved arrangement where you had 4 staff, and as far as my information is, the 4 staff, they were paid on time and all of that. And given the assurances, can the Chief Secretary explain to us what is the reason why there is no note in front of the Executive Council, and given that his counselor has been one of those persons treating with this matter in a direct way, and that is the counselor in the Office of the Chief Secretary?
Member.
Thank you very much. In fact, I love that question, Madam Presiding Officer. Let me be clear that while I was in the minority, and he can check in with his good friend, Minority Leader number 2 from Roxborough Argyle, he and we never enjoyed any kind of employment at the levels that happen under our watch now. When we were in the Office of the Minority, the people who were paid for us, we had a cleaner / front of house person, so the same person who cleaned did reception duties. We had a research officer, and we also had an office manager.
Members, I'd like to hear the question and the answer, please.
We also had an office manager, Madam Presiding Officer, and there were some driving services available to us. That was it. What the Minority Leader got without any proper procedure in place, we never got. And therefore, I'm saying to the Minority Leader that since there are public servants here who clearly has authority because people voted for them, and they are now the executive and can determine how the budget should be used, and they can hire as they will without preparing notes, without sending the notes through line secretaries, he can proceed to ask those individuals. Leave me out of it.
Follow-up, Minority.
Madam Presiding Officer, it's quite unfortunate that the chief secretary would so mislead the House and throw public servants under the bus when we sat in a meeting in good faith and certain agreements, your good self was there, and there were certain agreements made in that meeting, and to give the impression that what the minority currently inherit is something illegal and something...
Can I have your question, minority?
But, Madam Presiding Officer, the only additional staff different from what the former minority had was the fact that we separated the functions of
Can I have your question,
attendant
minority leader?
and cleaner. Therefore, I want to ask the Chief Secretary, who gave the approval in that meeting for the persons to be paid? Because it was only after that meeting the approval came. Who gave the approval?
Secretary for Finance Train.
Madam Presiding
Question and answer segment is not up for debate.
Madam Presiding Officer,
Thank you.
I will also love to know who gave the approval. Madam Presiding Officer, in that meeting, I gave no approval.
Members, standing order 44.
Further, Madam Presiding Officer, in that said meeting, the minority leader is right about one thing, and I identified that before. I was very stern in saying that there must be separation of the duties of hospitality from that of cleaning janitorial services, further to which, in that meeting, the minority leader came with a sheet identifying all of the portfolios that currently exist at the office of the opposition leader in Trinidad, and I indicated to him then, as I will now, that is something we have to look at and review, because we may not be able to mirror position for position as it exists there. Let me also add this, Madam Presiding Officer. It's interesting that the member is asking about who gave authority to pay. We are seeing, Madam Presiding Officer, that we had a cleaner being paid from the 13th. And guess what? At the 13th of December, the office wasn't even handed over to the minority yet. So who are you trying to fool? Who are you trying to fool? The minority leader, Madam Presiding Officer, picked his people. The clerk of the house organized it.
Member.
Without proper...
Member. I would appreciate if we could all be silent when persons are making their contribution. A question was asked, an answer is being given. Misleading the House is not a standing order that can be breached. It does not exist. Member, continue.
Yes, no, I was just wrapping up by saying that therefore, the person who has the authority or took the authority and did arrangements for payment and all of that, let them do the necessaries. I don't know if they expect me to come and do the note to bring for consideration of the Exec Council. However, no formal process was engaged for the hiring of these officers.
That was the 3 questions, minority. Minority Councillor, 5.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question number 65 to the Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy. Assemblyman Charlie Chavez Augustine.
Secretary for Finance, Trade and Economy.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. The MOU between the Tobago House of Assembly and the University of Technology, Jamaica. Allow me to just get the date, please. On Friday, 17th of March 2023, the University of Technology Jamaica and the Tobago House of Assembly finalized a memorandum of understanding This memorandum of understanding, upon being finalized, was dispatched from the University of Technology, Jamaica, down through to the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs for final vetting, and that's where the MOU is at this juncture.
Follow-up, Minority Councillor.
Madam Presiding Officer, is the Chief Secretary confirming that no MOU was signed on his trip to Jamaica after his stopover from Berlin?
Madam Presiding Officer, both the President of UTech Jamaica and myself affixed our signatures to the document, and the document was sent through to the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs from UTech through their Ministry of Foreign Affairs for final vetting.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, when the MOU is available, is it possible that the Chief Secretary can provide a copy of such MOU?
Secretary for Trade.
More than that, Madam Presiding Officer, we are intending, Madam Presiding Officer, that as soon as the document makes its way through the Foreign Affairs, that we will not just make it available, we will also publish it publicly.
Follow-up, Minority Councillor. Minority Councillor, no? Okay. Minority Councillor, question 74. I will remind you we have 2 minutes to this questions to Secretary. Question 74. Minority Councillor.
Question 74 to the Deputy Chief Secretary and Secretary in the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection, Assemblyman Faith B. Israel.
Secretary of the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Property management does not fall within the remit of the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary or the Office of the Secretary for the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection. Therefore, I am unable to answer question 74 as placed on the order paper.
Minority Councillor, follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, under which division is rent being paid for these buildings that are occupied by the division or the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary? Who pays the expenditure for the rental?
Refer to question, please. Thanks. For clarity.
Madam Presiding Officer, the response of the Deputy Chief Secretary and Secretary of Health is that she is not responsible for property management, so therefore she is not aware of, or she's unable to answer this question. But my follow-up to her is, under the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary, there are buildings rented, and the minority will like to know, and the people will like to know, under what vote or under line item of expenditure or division are those buildings rented? Are they rented under property management? Are they paid under property management, Madam Presiding Officer?
Member?
Madam Presiding Officer, because of time, I chose not to read the question, but I will read the question. It says, can the Deputy Chief Secretary confirm the following? If any building is being rented in the island of Trinidad for use by the Tobago House of Assembly, and the terms of the agreement, including name of the building, name of landlord, address of building, commencement date, rent paid per month, and so forth. The question asks about any building being rented on the island of Tobago by the Tobago, on the island of Trinidad by the Tobago House of Assembly. I am not responsible for property management under either of my portfolios, and therefore I am not in a position to answer the question as placed on the order paper.
Follow-up.
Madam Presiding Officer, under 2E, it asks, even if the Secretary is unable to answer all the other questions in terms of address, E asks the rent paid per month. And if payment is made from a division, there must be some sort of authority to make the payment. There should be information in terms of what you are paying for, who approved the payment, who is the payee, the amount to be paid. Is it that the division is not paying rent for any building in Trinidad, Madam Presiding Officer?
I think she answered that question. Members, I think that question was answered, Minority Councillor. I'm going to allow you one question because time has since elapsed.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, is rent being paid by the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary for a building in Trinidad?
Member.
Madam Presiding Officer, it has been public knowledge that the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary rented a building in Trinidad. That has been public knowledge. As it relates to the question that was asked, I am not responsible for property management, and therefore I do not have the additional answers that are expected of me at this moment. This property management does not fall under the Office of the Secretary of Health, Wellness and Social Protection or under the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary.
Members, I'm going to ask that you furnish the Minority Councillor with the answers she requires.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Time for question and answer has been well spent. Clerk?
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by secretaries or assistant secretaries, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Assembly and moved by a secretary or assistant secretary, public business, motion.
Minority Leader?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Let me also say thank you for approving this motion that stands in my name and which reads, whereas Section 65(1) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2503, provides that the Assembly shall hold an ordinary meeting at least once every month or as often as its business may require. And whereas on March 23rd, 2023, there was an embarrassing collapse of the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature, and whereas the House was adjourned in violation of the standing orders and based on patently erroneous advice that the clerk's absence precluded the House from convening, and whereas this collapse resulted in a flagrant breach of the law, bringing this most august House into public odium and exposure to legal challenge, be it resolved that this House conducts a comprehensive investigation into the circumstances which caused the reprehensible incident which occurred during the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature on March 23rd, 2023, and be it further resolved that this investigation be completed no later than June 30th, 2023, and laid in this Assembly at the earliest sitting thereafter. Madam Presiding Officer, before I proceed, I must admit that this motion does not totally reflect the intent of the minority, since this motion was not the motion submitted by this minority. However,
Minority, you are out of order. Retract and continue.
Madam Presiding Officer, this amended motion is one respectfully that has some issues where I would like to clarify very early in my contribution. The recital, and whereas the House was adjourned in violation of the standing orders and based on patently erroneous advice that the clerk's absence precluded the House from convening, it does not fully reflect the intention of this minority leader, since I do not have any information that can either confirm or deny that the deputy presiding officer at the time was patently erroneous and he did receive advice. In fact, in my contribution, I will be asking him the question whether he received advice and to whom did he receive such an advice. Madam Presiding Officer, additionally, the fifth recital, be it resolved that this House conducts a comprehensive investigation into the circumstances, is one that I do share some discomfort, because in my respectful view, the House cannot investigate itself, and therefore it is...
Minority Leader, this is the approved motion for debate.
So I would
I am
hope-
cautioning you, tread lightly. Continue.
Given the caution, Madam Presiding Officer, which I respectfully accept, the starting point of this motion is no doubt that there is a requirement under Section 65(1) of the THA Act for the Assembly to hold a meeting at least once every month. The date designated for the meeting in the month of March 2023 was the 23rd day of March 2023. This would have been the 15th sitting of the current Assembly. Madam Presiding Officer, the meeting of the Assembly did not occur in accordance with the legal requirement under Section 65(1) of the THA Act. The only reason given for the failure by the Assembly to have its meeting on 23rd March 2023 was that the clerk of the Assembly at the time was ill on that day and could not be physically present in the Assembly. The Deputy Presiding Officer made an announcement in similar terms to that which appears in a Newsday article of 24th March 2023, and the article states, Deputy Presiding Officer Joel Sampson said the plenary sitting had to be cancelled because the clerk did not arrive for work. He also claimed the clerk did not tell him, nor the presiding officer, that she would be absent from the sitting. He noted both the law and standing orders are silent about what should happen should the clerk of the House be absent from a sitting. But, Madam Presiding Officer, I have here with me a sitting in this very honorable House, dated March 24th, 2022, which was the fourth plenary sitting of this current Assembly legislature, THA 2021 to 2025.
Minority Leader, one moment. I'm not going to say this again. All phones are to be turned off. Should I say this again? Whoever phone is it will leave the chamber. Please put your phones on silent or take them off.
So,
Continue, Minority.
thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. So here it is. March 24th, same administration, same assembly term. The clerk is absent, and standing beautifully in line and deputizing on behalf of the clerk was a junior member of the Assembly Legislature. I have the photo right here, and we have the entire sitting from beginning to end. And may I dare say, Madam Presiding Officer, this was in fact not the only sitting to which the House went on in the absence of the clerk. But for some reason, this, and I'm going to make up a word, this amnesic administration, for some reason, forgot their own rules. This administration that would have conducted a sitting in the absence of the clerk caused a sitting to collapse. And the reason given was to attempt to bring the clerk into disrepute. When previously we came here as a house, previously the clerk was absent, and previously we were able to meet and treat with the business of the people. Madam Presiding Officer, this flagrant breach must not, should not be allowed to pass as any simple matter. Because what you have in this instance is the fact that this current administration caused the Assembly to in fact break the law by not meeting in accordance with the Tobago House of Assembly Act that requires us.
I'm seeing somebody. Member?
Madam Presiding Officer, I rise on Standing Order 44, subsection 5, which reads, no member shall impute improper motives to any other member. And I stand to raise objections to the contribution or part contribution made by the minority leader, the word he coined, and to ascribe improper motives to this side for an action that would have taken place in this House.
Member, I heard no names or members being called. Minority, continue.
Madam Presiding Officer, thank you. Thank you, thank you. I know over on the other side is kind of antsy right now. A lot is happening. And they but Madam Presiding Officer, and of course they want to deflect from the issue, which is that we were told, and I want Tobagonians to understand the gravity of this issue. An entire sitting was cancelled on the basis that the clerk was absent, when this very house, not the previous house in which also met without a clerk in it, but this very house met on more than one occasion. The fourth sitting, and we also met when I had to respond to the budget debate. I responded and the clerk was ill or was absent, and the budget debate went on. So I don't know if they have amnesia. I don't know if they just don't know that they don't know. But they are making a mockery of this honorable house. And this is embarrassing for all of Tobago to see, to view, because this is happening in the face of not just Tobago, but Trinidad and Tobago and the world. And here it is. Every time we get up and say we are man, we want to run our own thing. But if you can't run this house in the way the law prescribes it, how and why should anybody consider giving you more authority? It's embarrassing, and this administration must own up to this embarrassment. It is shameful that we came here to do the business of Tobagonians. Tobagonians elected all of us. In fact, this administration shouldn't be paid for that month because you all failed the Tobagonians. This is clear dereliction of duty. And Madam Presiding Officer, you know what is vexing, what is embarrassing about this? When this was taking place on that day, I advised my colleague, the leader of Assembly Business. I said, let us call the Parliament and get some guidance. And you know why I said that? Because I understand that we have Standing Order 92. And even if we don't know, or even if we're unsure, Standing Order 92 says where the standing orders of this assembly is silent, then we simply revert and refer to what passes or what is practiced by the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't know about them, but I did call the Parliament, and the advice was clear, that a junior member can in fact deputize on behalf of the clerk. But that is without question now, because we as a House would have already resolved that by precedent. So we didn't even have to ask anybody, because without any question, we already practiced this very action on multiple times. So I had planned to bring a whole long presentation and tell all of Tobago what the law says and what the law doesn't say. But the House would have already resolved this issue. So all we require now is for persons to own. We need to name and shame and let persons face the consequences, the persons who would have conspired this great atrocity upon the people of Tobago. And it is for this reason why I felt very challenged to support the resolution that says the House must in fact investigate the House. Because what we are very well asking ourselves to do is to have the very people who caused this damning, shameful, embarrassing situation to come now to try to correct itself. I'm a parent, and if I, as a parent, do something wrong, I don't know how I, the parent, could ask me to correct me. I don't see the logic in it. I can't understand it. And as much as the only reason I really want this motion to go forward, hence why I'm debating it. But to ask the House to correct itself when the House is culpable of disregarding precedent, disregarding standing orders, because the point is, if there are precedent for how you treat with when the presiding officer is absent, who on that day, unfortunately, wasn't here as well. This precedent, the deputy PO steps in. And if the deputy PO doesn't if the deputy PO is absent, then the House elects a deputy presiding officer for the day. So it means the House is saying that under no circumstances must we allow the House not to meet for matters to which the House would consider trivial. So we can resolve within ourselves. So if that is there, good logic and common sense dictate that if the absence of the presiding officer could not stop the business of the assembly, then the absence of the clerk of the assembly cannot either. That is just logical. That is just plain common sense. But for some reason, I don't know, like common sense and too common on the other side. Because when you look at the kind of conversations they are having and recording themselves,
Minority
and
Leader,
sharing it.
you are out of order.
Madam Presiding Officer, there is no question that the Assembly has a quorum that was present on the 23rd of March, 2023, and as such, the meeting of the Assembly ought to have proceeded. And Madam Presiding Officer, it's not just me alone saying this, and it's not me alone talking about this shambolic kind of occurrence. One political activist, Anthony James, is saying The principle of government is that the government cannot stop. And if it stops, it means that the government has failed. So the question is, because I know all of Tobago is asking, has this government failed? Has this government, because we like to call ourselves the government of Tobago, has the government of Tobago, in fact, collapsed? And if we are to go by what transpired on May 23rd, then the answer is a clear on March 23rd, the 15th sitting, then it is clear that the government has in fact collapsed. Because he's saying anytime the government stops, that's an insurrection. He's even saying that is treason. Not my words. Anytime the government, but you are not hearing the conversation. Up to now, when you realize that, when they are found wanting, they run and hide. And you can't see them, you can't hear them. They like Facebook, but all of a sudden they're quiet. Because up to now, they have not answered on this matter. He said, you're not even hearing the chief secretary. He's the leader of the pack, and he's not saying anything. The deputy chief secretary that he left there because he was not there and he can't give account for where he was because he was not on assembly business. And this is the man claim. He said he went to Germany and then he ended up in Jamaica. The principal of the Jamaica trip was the Honorable Ian Pollard. He was back on work on Monday. Monday preceding. Where was Farley Augustine? He abandoned his post. But he earmarked the deputy Faith was the leader here. Weren't hearing any statement.
Minority, you're straying. Can you get back to the point, please? Members, please.
A comment on the matter, but dear, I will move on.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Presiding Officer. I shall move on.
Thank you very much.
All you got to praise more than God for what coming at all. I said, for what coming at all.
Members, please, the minority is trying to finish his contribution.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I know they're looking for a distraction now. Look at all.
Members, standing order 44. Let's be guided by that, please. Minority, continue.
Thank you. In any event, our standing orders make provisions for what should have happened when the law and the standing orders are silent. And as I read before, Standing Order 92, rules in cases not provided by standing orders. In any matter, and 92.1 says in any matter, not in... Madam President.
Member, I'll ask you to step outside, please.
Wow. That's the deputy. You understand why nothing about order in this case?
Minority.
Madam Presiding Officer, what we are seeing, Tobago is seeing, it is clear. This is a disorderly, this is an unmannerly, this is a disruptive, this is a shame of an administration that just does not care about law, does not care about order. Look right in front of our face. Even after being reminded, turn off your phone. Wow. Madam Presiding Officer, I don't know where this greeting. What is the usage and practice of the House of Representatives of Trinidad and Tobago when the clerk of the House is absent? You know what is the use? The starting point to this could have been discovered if only one simple reading of the standing orders of the House of Representatives of Trinidad and Tobago was taken. And it says, clerk means the clerk of the House, or if the office is vacant, or the clerk is absent from duty, all that is required is that a person appointed to act as clerk of the House, all that is required is for you to appoint someone to act as the clerk of the House. And includes any person authorized by the clerk to perform any of the functions or exercise any of the powers of the clerk under these standing orders. Simple resolution. So all you have to do Worst case scenario is call the clerk and get the authorization to up. So I see clerk at all. She was able to call and say she was ill. So clearly,
Members, time for the rebuttal would be provided.
at the time, I don't know how this one, see? How much more time?
Minority Leader, continue, please.
About 10 minutes?
You have until 3.
Okay. Oh, our time, man. We have time to talk. Let me talk. Right? Oh, Lord. So, Madam Presiding Officer, all it really required was a simple call. And we could have appointed anyone. And the fact is, and I need to reiterate this fact, the fact is that we would have done it already right in this house, right in this term. So the president was there, the president is there. So we really didn't need any back and forth about this. And even if you wanted, a simple reading of the standing orders would have allowed the meeting of the assembly to proceed. A simple act on the part of the clerk to authorize someone to perform or functions would have allowed the business of the people of Tobago to continue uninterrupted. I dare say that if the standing orders were properly understood by those who lead this assembly, there would have been absolutely no cancellation of the meeting on March 23rd, 2023, and for Mr. Anthony James to be crying every day that we need some kind of resolution on this. Madam Presiding Officer, it is in these circumstances that we must call this House to instruct that the Assembly Legislature launch a full and independent investigation into the circumstances which caused the embarrassing collapse of the 15th sitting of the Assembly on March 22, 2023, and that the investigation be completed by no later than June 30, 2023, and laid at the sitting of the Assembly thereafter. Additionally, we make this call because this Assembly has now been exposed to the possibility of legal action by its failure to hold a meeting in accordance with Section 65(1) of the THA Act. This is a very serious matter brought on by the negligence, the incompetence of those that lead this Assembly. The failure to hold the Assembly sitting in accordance with the legislative framework is a breach of the democratic principles which underpin our Twin Islands state. Section 1 of the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago provides, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago shall be a sovereign democratic state. It was a failure to hold parliamentary sittings that got the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, in the crosshairs of the UK Supreme Court. And this matter on the application of Miller Appellant versus the Prime Minister Respondent 2019, UK case number 41, a case brought by some citizens of the United Kingdom when the Prime Minister of the UK suspended sittings of the House of Commons. The United Kingdom Supreme Court ruled that this power to suspend the Parliament is limited by the constitutional principles with which it would otherwise conflict. The limit on the power to suspend/cancel is that a decision will be unlawful if the suspension cancellation has the effect of frustrating or preventing without reasonable justification the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions as a legislature and as the body responsible for the supervising the executive. And therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, not only is this matter embarrassing, but it is one that has far-reaching legal consequences for this House, because it therefore means any member, any citizen, any resident of Tobago, by virtue of what transpired on March 23rd, 2023, can now take legal action against this entire Assembly because we failed on that opportunity to do that which the law prescribes. And the law prescribes that we meet at least once, can meet multiple times, but at least once, and by at least the fourth Thursday of that month, and we did not. The cancellation of the Assembly meeting on 23rd March 2023 had the effect of frustrating or preventing, without reasonable justification, the ability of the Assembly to carry out its constitutional and the legislative functions as a legislature and as a body responsible for supervising this Executive Council. The cancellation of the Assembly on that day was therefore unlawful, and a full and speedy investigation is therefore required. And Madam Presiding Officer, this issue leaves you with so many questions, more questions than answers. And I hope, when the speakers come, they will tell us who advised the Deputy PO to suspend, adjourn the sitting in the most unlawful way. Because I would have, in fact, you would have recognized we had to have 2 sittings thereafter. Because the sitting, while we were told it was suspended and adjourned, was improperly done. And therefore, it still leaves the question, what is the status of that 15th sitting of the Assembly? Because nobody has really answered that question up to this day. What is the status? Because we moved on to the 16th and we moved on to the 17th. But what is the status of that very sitting that was so unlawfully and illegally adjourned? Madam Presiding Officer, the very Deputy Presiding Officer must also tell us who advised him and what was the reason. Because I suspect the information that was put in the public domain was very damaging to a public officer. And that information, humbly and respectfully, I believe, should be corrected in this honorable House. Because what the information by effect did was to tell all the world that a public officer abandoned a post, which, as far as information is coming, was untrue. And therefore, that officer deserves an apology. Madam Presiding Officer, so I believe we must also understand whether it was deliberate, because I'm trying to figure out why would you so implicate and try to embarrass? So that which you try to embarrass, you end up embarrassing yourself. Because we met here as a House on the 4th sitting, and I also responded to the budget without, the clerk was ill the same way as well. And I was absent, but the business of the House carried on. So, Madam Presiding Officer, as I wrap up, respectfully, I accept the motion that I had to debate on, but of course, I hope that you appreciate the intention of this minority in bringing this motion, one to openly declare that this administration is clueless, because here you have an administration basically approving a president and then in the same breath disapproving the president. Madam Presiding Officer, I don't know what else to say about what is happening, but it's very sad, it's very unfortunate, and in layman terms, it looks like muddy pot. We really look like if we're carrying on muddy pot in this house. A long time when children used to play. This is what it's looking like we don't know what we're about. And I hope that this House will agree with this motion of the minority for us to have a proper, independent investigation so that something like this never in the history of the Tobago House of Assembly repeats itself. Madam Presiding Officer, With those words, I beg to move this motion that stands in my name. I thank you.
Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to second this motion, and I also beg to reserve my right to speak subsequently.
Text. Okay.
Councillor O.
So on. But the first thing I want to draw to the attention of the minority leader, that when he comes to this house, and he does not want to embarrass himself, he must learn to quote the law as it is stated. Now, Section 65(1) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2503, Act 40 of 1996 reads, "The Assembly shall hold an ordinary meeting as often as its business may require, and at least once every month." So don't play with the words. Don't turn them around. Don't put them where they don't belong. When you're quoting law, quote law in its correct format. Standing order of this assembly, Standing Order 16(1) reads, subject to paragraph 2 of this standing order, the assembly shall meet at least once every month on the 4th Thursday at 1:30 in the afternoon, but it may hold ordinary meetings as often as its business may require. Now I want to say to the House, on that fateful day in March 22, 2023, there was an ordinary meeting called. There was a quorum. All was in place. A quorum is required. A quorum was in place. But the presiding officer was not in the chair on that day. I want to take this House to Standing Order 11, which reads, when the presiding officer is unavoidably absent from any day's sitting, an announcement of the presiding officer's absence shall be made by the clerk at the table of the House. I repeat.
Councillor O, apparently we have missed something, Minority Leader. You have to propose your motion.
What's that?
He has to reread the motion as... Read it from the beginning. Oh, I have to propose the motion. Yes. So I'm going to ask Minority, can you kindly read it over, and then I'll propose it to the House, and then Councillor O, you will be given your remaining time.
Okay. So the motion reads, whereas Section 65(1) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2503, provides that the Assembly shall hold an ordinary meeting at least once every month, or as often as its business may require. And whereas on March 23rd, 2023, there was an embarrassing collapse of the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature, and whereas the House was adjourned in violation of the standing orders and based on patently erroneous advice that the clerk's absence precluded the House from convening, and whereas this collapse resulted in a flagrant breach of the law bringing this most august house into public odium and exposure to legal challenge. Be it resolved that this House conducts a comprehensive investigation into the circumstances which caused the reprehensible incident which occurred during the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature on March 23, 2023, and be it further resolved that this investigation be completed no later than June 30th, 2023, and laid in this Assembly at the earliest sitting thereafter.
Thank you, Minority.
You're welcome.
Honorable members, the question proposed is, whereas Section 65(1) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2503 provides that the Assembly hold an ordinary meeting at least once every month or as often as its business may require, and whereas on March 23, 2023, there was an embarrassing collapse of the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature, and whereas the House was adjourned in violation of the standing orders and based on patently erroneous advice that the clerk's absence precluded the House from convening, and whereas this collapse resulted in a flagrant breach of the law, bringing this most august House into public odium and exposure to legal challenge, be it resolved that this House conducts a comprehensive investigation into the circumstances which caused the reprehensible incident which occurred during the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature on March 23, 2023. And be it further resolved that this investigation be completed no later than June 30, 2023, and laid in this Assembly at the earliest sitting thereafter. Member, you can continue.
Allow me to read again Standing Order 11. When the presiding officer is unavoidably absent from any day's sitting, an announcement of the presiding officer's absence shall be made by the clerk at the table of the House. The deputy presiding officer shall then take the chair and shall be vested with all the powers of the presiding officer, as if the presiding officer was in the chair. So to the minority leader, I want to break this down. It was known, it was a known fact, the presiding officer was absent. There is a requirement under the standing order that I have just read that the clerk of this House shall make an announcement about the absence of the presiding officer shall be made by the clerk. No other member or person in this House at the table of the House. I want to point out to us that if the clerk is absent, there is not a deputy clerk in this Assembly Legislature. Let me inform that the office of deputy clerk was created by Cabinet Minute 2886, dated the 14th of October 2004, and to date it remains unclassified. That simply means that when the position was created by Cabinet, it was not placed in a salary range in the staff establishment. Therefore, the classification and the requirement for such has to be done by the personnel department.
Members, minority. Thank you.
So therefore, this House operates without a deputy clerk of the House. Now, the minority leader made reference, apparently he possessed information that the clerk was ill, that her absence was due to something. All right? I want to point out to the minority leader, he made mention a while ago, and I hope I understood him, that the clerk could have authorized someone else to perform her duties. Let me say to the minority leader that the clerk has no authority to appoint any officer to sit in a public service post in this assembly legislature. She holds no such authority. So to flippantly say that the clerk could have appointed another officer to do, that cannot happen, minority leader, it cannot happen. I'm not going to be long because, and then you made mention, you keep referring to Standing Order 92. Standing Order 92 is only relevant if the standing orders of this House is silent.
Minority Leader, I'm cautioning you. Standing Order 44, no interruptions when a member is on their feet making their contribution.
Is only relevant
Continue.
if the standing orders of this House is silent. In this case, the standing orders of this House is clear on the process, what should happen in this chamber. If the presiding officer is absent, what should happen? It also provides that if the presiding officer and the deputy presiding officer are both absent, what should happen? Madam Presiding Officer, I thank you.
Assemblyman Duke.
Madam Presiding Officer, I thank you. It's been a while since I've been to this House. Indeed, a lot has happened, and a lot is happening. The motion before us this evening is a serious one. It is extremely serious. We are dealing with a violation of primary law. Primary law. Fundamental law that binds the state. And no secondary law, no standing orders can violate primary law. But those who sit here are not as educated as they position themselves to be. They're grasping at straws because somehow they're politically drowned in. And they seek to make this House a mockery, a laughing stock to the worldwide web and people who are looking on through the web that we don't know what we're doing here. I want to make it absolutely plain today, Madam Presiding Officer, to my colleagues on the other side. It's time to read. Read the Tobago House of Assembly Act. Section 65 is uncompromising in its imposition upon the Assembly. It is uncompromising. Allow me to read it while I could rehash it. It says the Assembly shall hold an ordinary meeting as often as its business may require, and, not or, and at least once every month. This is not up for debate. This is not based on gut feeling. This is not based on the clerk of the House, right? This is the law. It is binding. The word shall takes on a special significance in law. It is a command that must be carried out. It's not optional. It must be carried out. And I ask myself as I ponder upon the level of mental poverty that is being displayed by some of my colleagues, I ask myself, would any of them break any of these laws? And I quote 7. The 7th will be the first one I just debated there. Would any of them put God out of their thoughts and not have an assembly seal when Section 5 of the Tobago House of Assembly Act says that the assembly shall have a seal? Would we allow that here? Would the assembly be the assembly if it doesn't have a seal? That's the question. Shall is an imperative command. It's not optional. So if it says in Section 5 that the assembly shall have a seal, then the assembly better have a seal. It's one. When it says the president shall administer the oath to assemblymen in Section 6 of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, are we going to play with that? Are we going to pussyfoot with that? Are we going to play any, mini, minor, more with that?
Mr. Duke,
It's a language, Madam
a language I won't allow.
It's a language in the book.
Retract.
Madam Presiding Officer, it's in the book. Unless it's a vulgar language, let me know that. On what grounds are you telling me, Madam Presiding? I have my rights here.
Mr. Duke, it is a language I won't allow.
What is the language?
Retract.
Tell me my wrong with the language,
and
Madam
move
Presiding.
on.
In fact, let me sit down. You tell me what is wrong with my language, Madam Presiding.
Mr. Duke, Mr. Duke.
I have a right to question you on that.
You don't. What I say here is final. That language is not allowed. Retract and move on.
Definitely. Madam Presiding Officer, I retract.
Thank
I must
you.
admit I've been here for a while. A lot of things are changed, and they are changing in the House. As I said, when you are told the president shall administer the oath to assemblyman, how come we don't play with that? How come we don't say, well, let a police officer administer the oath, yes, because she's taking long to come? How come we don't say, let the clerk of the house administer the oath because I don't like how the president doing it? How come we don't do that? Shall is an imperative command. It's not optional. It's mandatory. It's not something to play with. How come when they say the chief secretary's salary shall be equal to that of a minister, how come they don't pay him like a CPAP worker? How come they don't pay him like a URP worker? How come they don't pay him like a regular clerk? Because shall, in law, is an imperative command. It's mandatory. How come when they say that the assembly shall continue for 4 years? How we don't play with that? How come we don't take it to 5 or 6 or 7 or just drop it at 2? Because we understand shall in law. How come when we say that the assembly shall not be responsible for items under the 6th schedule, how come we don't want to pretend that we're responsible for national security, immigration, and these issues? How come we don't play that? Because the law says that. We shall not be responsible for that. Shall is a command that shall not be played with. What a mercy. How come when it says that the executive council shall be responsible for carrying out the functions of the assembly under section 434? How come we don't play with that? But here in this house, we have a group, and I want to be careful with my words, Madam Presiding Officer, because I know when I speak, everyone listening like that. You can hear the silence in the room. How could we allow the group on that side to play with the word shall? Here, section 65. And it's not over. It's not over. I just want to let you know that. Our right to challenge what happened 2 months ago is not over. It's not out of the door as yet. It is not out of the door as yet. I want to serve notice to my colleagues here today. Section 65 says, the assembly shall hold, shall again. How could you play that shall? An ordinary meeting as often as it requires. Every week, every day, twice a month, and at least once a month, and at least once a month. So on the 23rd, when we called a meeting here, and we came here, and the meeting couldn't have concluded because of whatever they felt was the reason, it's okay to feel anything. It's okay. It's okay to believe anything. But one thing you must know is that the law is what governs this house. Because the Tobago House of Assembly is a corporate body. It has its own rules. Yeah? And these rules are found in Tobago House of Assembly Act. You just can't break them and remain the Tobago House of Assembly. So when, on that day, March 23rd, the House failed to start, we had the 24th of March, yeah? We had the 25th of March, yeah? We had the 26th of March, yeah? We had the 27th of March, yeah? We had the 28th of March, yes? The 29th of March, yeah? And the 30th of March to conclude the business. Because the law must be fulfilled. But we have today posing as intelligentsia or as knowledge-based people, people who are derived of the basic knowledge that governs this house. And so they are walking around with the sharp suits, the spike heel, the red bottoms as they call it, but mentally they are poor. They are weak, making this place a laughing stock, Madam Presiding Officer. People are chuckling. Let me tell you this. The Prime Minister, my political enemy, understood and understands the law. So when the Privy Council ruled that, hey, what are doing there, that's not right. Immediately, though he hem and he haw and he this and he that, and said we kind of right, we nearly get right, he admitted, he said, that we will go to Parliament and pass some amendment to legitimize the action done by these councillors and aldermen from the 3rd of December, that's when the period expired, to the 18th of May, when the judgment was given. There must be something to correct law when it is broken or when there's a breach of contract. What did we do to correct that, Madam Presiding Officer? What did my colleagues who lack parliamentary and proper knowledge, what did they do on that side to correct this? Nothing. And time is ticking. When the clock ticks, there are two songs, a tick and a talk. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. If you only hear one, something is wrong with you. Somehow, they fail to correct the malady, the disease. They fail to correct the error. And they continue to pose and talk about no money was assigned to the post, as if they know what they are saying about. They don't even know what they're saying. This is not a matter for the clerk. It's the law here that kicks in. And the law is straightforward. The House, the Assembly, shall meet as often as it requires, and, not all, and at least once a month. Nothing is wrong with postponing a meeting for the day. Nothing is wrong with that. You could say put it off. As a matter of fact, you could even reach on a Sunday, have a meeting on a Sunday or a Saturday. When they wanted to move from the cotton dollar to the polymer dollar, you know what they do? Saturday meeting, whole day running through. When they wanted to move from the Stabilization Act to the Industrial Relation Act, one day they pass the same thing through the Parliament. There is no executive that is superior to any assembly. None. None. I wish to repeat. Some people think this is, what? Something Tobago House of Augustine. Some people think it's Tobago House of Augustine. They think that kind of way. And so when they stay, they could talk to anybody as they want inside the house, walk out and say that's something else to go and do. And all kind of thing. They could give back people keys and take it back and all kind of thing they could do. Some people, Madam Presiding Officer, feel this house is House of Augustine. Let me say some people. I'm not casting any stones today. I'm just saying some people may have that in their minds. But this is the House of Assembly. And in this house, we give directions to the Assembly. We are the legal body. Even though we don't make laws, we are the legal body, so entitled to make laws. And whatever we bind in here is bounded. This is a critical body. And not to meet, not to meet at least once a month is as vile and as wrong as the president of the country not administering the oath to an assemblyman and he comes in as an assemblyman. It is as vile and wrong as the assembly not holding itself out for 4 years, but going rather for 6. It's as wrong as that. Because all of these would have incorporated in the statement shall be 4 years. Shall. I almost trembled when I saw the motion brought by the minority leader. I don't know if you understand the dynamite we have here, you know. Sometimes people just think they're right until they end up in the Privy Council with urgent action. And they recognize what you did was a big violation. And the House has indeed collapsed. Immediately, on March 23rd, I recall I took to my Facebook and I said the House has collapsed. I used those words. It is not that I don't know what to do. Each of these secretaries have legal departments and advisors. Each of them. They are not lacking knowledge or counselors. None of them are without advice. And you come inside here, run the Tobago House of Assembly to the ground, and pretend that because you kept a meeting in April and you're keeping one in May, that all this is legal. You can't correct this. This can only be corrected by an amendment in the Parliament. Are you hearing what I'm saying to you? This can only be corrected by amendment in the Parliament. They have to amend this. They have to amend this. I don't know if this shall in this sentence doesn't make much sense. This shall leaves an excuse for your personal behavior, but the shall, whether used when the president is quoted as having to administer the oath, is mandatory. But the shall here is not mandatory. How do you know which shall is mandatory and which is not? My colleagues are making a lot of big mistakes. Not only are they talking out of time, they are acting out of time. Because such an action required you to postpone it to another day, immediately, and try to rectify things for another day within the month. But they leave it. And as you understand, they're in charge. We can tell them anything. But I wish to lay today before this house that I hear bells ringing. It's not Christmas bells. It's a bell that gives the voting public of Tobago a joy. A joy that exceeds the Christmas joy. I hear the bells are ringing. It's not just local government bells in Trinidad. But I hear the bells are ringing in Tobago. And it would seem as if the Prime Minister was being prophetic when he say, before you register your party, he said, see about election one time. Because the breach is there. It's an open breach. It's an open breach. And I want this house to record this today, you know. This cannot be fixed with a laugh or drinks and a skin teeth. This is serious business. Shall is shall. Somebody went to court. Now they have amended, have allowed people to councillors and aldermen in Trinidad to go beyond the 3ST on several occasions. It's a normal thing they do. One day a man decided to challenge that and say, you can't kick in no law now to extend the life of these councillors that is nearly expired to 4 years. You can't do that. And the judge at the civil court level said, nah, go ahead, continue. Their life is extended. The judges at the appeal court say their life is properly extended. But when you go to the law lords, they say it's wrong. It is not properly extended. That is for the new people coming in, because people have rights. If this assembly is a corporate body, this assembly must obey its own rules. And the rules are embodied in the Tobago House of Assembly Act. There is no subservient act laws, no secondary laws that could trump the act. What they can do is explain it further, but they cannot trump or annul any portion of that act. And no act could trump the Constitution. Madam Presiding Officer, I'm calling for my colleague on that side today to set the date for THA elections. Tobagonians are fed up. I'm fed up of this type of, to use the words of my colleague, muddy pot. Muddy pot, they're fed up of that. People need to be serious when they're in office. And I'm going to go in with the latest news for the week. That's for the week. I was good entertainment for the week. But for now, we have to get our act together in this house. Let my colleagues on that side call the election. Let them call it now. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Members, please. Assemblyman Sampson. Assemblyman Duke, please allow for Mr. Sampson to make his contribution. Thank you. Proceed.
Firstly, allow me to thank the electoral district of Bonaccord Crown Point for allowing me this opportunity to represent them in this August House. Madam Presiding Officer, this motion is ill-advised and ill-placed for today's sitting. This motion only serves to have this House debate the actions and inactions of the clerk of the House and will only serve to embarrass the public officer. Further, there are prescribed rules and regulations that guide how to treat with public servants such as the clerk of this House when there is alleged misleads. But this House, in this setting, is not the most appropriate place to address these concerns. Notwithstanding, as the Deputy Presiding Officer and the one that presided over the sitting, which occurred on the 23rd of March, the adjourned and not cancelled was valid despite the brief time span. Hence the reason the consecutive numbers for sittings rolled on. At this point, I wish to recap a complete run of events so that it will be lucidly clear to all and sundry what happened and how it happened.
Yes. Nice one. Nice one.
Pop goes the weasel.
Mr. Duke, members, I had already indicated about the name calling in this House. Members would be addressed as to Standing Order 46.6 by their portfolios or their electoral district designation. Please, let's maintain the decorum and honor of this House, please. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I threw my con, I call no foul. I arrived punctually as usual, eagerly anticipating confirmation of a quorum before commencing the proceedings. The presiding officer was away on official duty, for which the clerk of the House had dutifully organized. So I was made aware that I was needed to deputize for the entire sitting well in advance. It can be assumed that the clerk of the House was also aware of the fact, since the clerk of the House was the one to approve the organized duty for the presiding officer. However, sometime after my arrival to the legislature, I was informed that the clerk of the House had not yet arrived and attempts to reach her had proved unsuccessful. So when I listened to the minority and he states that the clerk was contacted, I don't know if she contacted him, but alas, I know she ought to contact the presiding officer, and if the presiding officer is not present, she contacts the deputy presiding officer.
Go ahead. Member, please have a seat.
At no point did I say the clerk. I said, given under the rubric that the clerk can delegate, I said the clerk could have been contacted. Could have. I never said the clerk was contacted. So that is the point of clarification. Thank you.
Noted. Continue.
Choosing to extend the benefit of the doubt, I patiently awaited for some additional time, understanding that unforeseen circumstances can arise. Regrettably, it soon became apparent that the clerk would not be joining us. In light of this development, I promptly contacted the presiding officer to discuss the matter and inquire about any prior notification regarding her absence. The substantive presiding officer indicated that she had no prior knowledge of the clerk being absent. The chief administrator was then contacted because based on legal procedures of the THA, the chief administrator is the only one authorized to appoint a clerk to act in the event of the absence of the clerk of the House. The chief administrator indicated that she was not aware that the clerk would be absent from the House, and therefore no measure was put in place for a temporary replacement. And given that she was only learning this at the said time of the sitting, she was not in a position to act in the position of clerk of the House herself. I heard the minority make mention that at previous sittings we had a junior staff sitting. That was because notice was given and a recommendation was put forward. By this time, it was well past the start of the sitting, and members were waiting, clueless about what was actually happening. Having exhausted all measures to get a clerk for the House, I took it upon myself to hurriedly prepare a note to address the Assembly, providing a comprehensive briefing and highlighting the relevant laws and provisions outlining the standing order that accounted for the resulting delay, while at the same time acknowledging the absence of those who sent their notice of their absence beforehand. It became evident to me that I needed to treat with the day's proceedings with an abundance of caution. I am not an attorney, not even the Bush variety, and I did not have the benefit of legal advice at the time. After sharing the details, I had meticulously prepared and made the decision to adjourn the session out of an abundance of caution. The members of the House did in fact sit, but I must note that at the time of that short sitting, the minority leader and the minority councillor were absent. Indeed. Indeed. Subsequent to the sitting, I asked through the presiding officer's office for a legal opinion, and one was sorted and provided. And I wish to share aspects of that report with the House today. The legal opinion was provided by Deborah Peake, senior counsel. In her opinion, she says, and I quote, "While this standing order assigns specific functions to the clerk, where the presiding officer and the deputy presiding officer are absent, Section 69 of the Act is clear that the standing orders made by the Assembly are subject to provisions of the Act. The provisions of the standing order cannot trump the provisions of the Act, such as Section 64 and 65, as the Act is primary legislation. It is to be expected that if the clerk is unavoidably absent for any reason, some other person can be assigned the responsibility of performing the functions of her office so that the business of the legislator can
Member?
On a point of clarification, can the member please elucidate on Section 64 and 65 of the Act for the viewing public? Because he's just saying Section 64 and 65, so that people can appreciate.
The member is quoting from a legal opinion. Continue.
Madam Presiding Officer, sometimes I wonder to myself. They say everyone has a right to be silly, but the minority always seem to abuse its privilege.
Member.
I retract the statement.
Thank you.
Madam Presiding Officer. The Deputy Presiding Officer or such other member of the Assembly elected by the members to preside. Standing Order 9.1 provides that the presiding officer shall have power to regulate the conduct of business in all matters not provided in the standing orders. It must be noted here, Madam Presiding Officer, based on the legal opinion, whenever there is an absent clerk of the House, someone can and should be appointed to act. So the question this House must ask itself today is, who is authorized to appoint someone to act as the clerk of the House? Can the substantive presiding officer show up and appoint someone to act as the clerk of the House? The answer to that is no. Can I, as deputy presiding officer, appoint someone to act? The answer is no. Can the chief secretary appoint someone to act? The answer is no. Can this House vote and appoint someone to act? The answer is no. Can the clerk herself appoint someone to act in the manner of a clerk in the House of Representatives? Can someone appoint someone to act? The answer is still no. And the reason why we can just mimic the standing orders of the House of Representatives in this instance is because in Trinidad, they define the clerk as any person authorized by the clerk to perform any of the functions or exercise any of the powers of the clerk under the standing orders. While in the THA Act, superior to any standing orders, defines the clerk of the House as the person holding or acting in the office established under Section 72. Madam Presiding Officer, the only person in Tobago authorized to appoint someone to act as clerk of the House as established under Section 72 is the Chief Administrator under Delegated Authority Legal Notice 105 for public servants. Legal Notice 105 for public servants like Clerk of the House that is in Group 5. Yes. Madam Presiding Officer, unlike in Trinidad, where the clerk can appoint the Clerk of the House and Deputy Clerk of the House are in a stream isolated from the rest of the public service, our clerk comes from among the ranks of the regular public service. It is only the Chief Administrator in Tobago that can appoint a clerk in the House. And if the Chief Administrator was not notified by the clerk that she wouldn't be in office, then the Chief Administrator just did not have enough time to select the next in line senior public servant to act in the position. Truth, matter of fact, we only heard from the clerk after the matter of fact that I spoke in the House. So she only communicated to us after she was thrown under the bus. So essentially, Madam Presiding Officer, if the clerk of the House had notified someone in a timely manner, someone could have been appointed to act as the clerk of the House. There goes the investigation that is needed.
Members, Minority Leader, I would like to hear Assemblyman Sampson's contribution, please. Thank you.
As Deputy Presiding Officer, I use the powers vested in me in Standing Orders 9-1 to convene the sitting and to adjourn it quickly. This standing could not give me the authority to appoint someone to act as clerk of the House, since the law makes provision for the appointment of a clerk of the House. Standing Order 9-1 only comes into play when there exists no provision. The said day that someone deputized in this House, the presiding officer was present, and therefore Standing Order 11-1 was not required. Also, after getting legal advice, which came after the fact, the sitting that had happened and was adjourned by me is in law also considered a proper meeting. So the House in fact met, and the minority leader's absence was noted as he was not present at the time of the meeting. So, Madam Presiding Officer.
Point of clarification, Madam Presiding Officer, it is absolutely disingenuous when the records of the House have both minority council and I in this House waiting for this honorable member to now prescribe that we were absent. Very disingenuous.
Members,
Madam
continue.
Presiding Officer, if it's one thing, when you're presenting a case, you must have evidence. On my phone, I have a recording of 2 minutes and 45 seconds when I came into this godly house and stated what I did. The minority leader and the minority councillor were not in the house. Outside of the house is not inside of the
Members.
house.
Members. Are you standing on a point of order, clarity?
Left to go and see the presiding officer, the deputy presiding officer. The deputy presiding officer came in, and we know the House rules. I cannot re-enter while he was on his feet. As soon as he was off his feet, we were back in the room. So to say that we were absent is very disingenuous, very dishonest. Very dishonest. Very. A member could. So if I go out to utilize the bathroom.
Madam Presiding Officer, can I continue?
Please.
Thank you very much. So, Madam Presiding Officer, in closing, I hope this clears things up for both the public and members of this House. It is time to move on and ensure that the clerk of this House never disappears without forewarning. Thank you.
Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. And I thank the Deputy Presiding Officer for his account of what transpired on the day, which is not totally our account on this minority side of what transpired on the day. So the minority came into this chamber on March 23rd, 2023, prepared and ready to dispense with the business of the people, Madam Presiding Officer. As we are all aware that it has become a practice of this House that the sittings are generally delayed. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes went, and we recognized that the sitting did not convene. After more than 20 minutes, Madam Presiding Officer, sitting here, members asking what is happening, the minority also inquired as to why there was such a delay in the convening of the House. And Madam Presiding Officer, the minority leader spoke with the leader of Assembly Business. So I don't understand how today the Deputy Presiding Officer could report that we were not in the House, we were not present. Further, Madam Presiding Officer, in conversation with the leader of Assembly Business, the minority leader was advised that it appears that the clerk was not in the house. So we firstly, we looked around because we were trying to deduce what was causing the delay. So we looked around and we counted to make sure that there was a quorum in keeping with the standing order. And there was indeed 9 members. Then as the inquiries continued, we heard that the presiding officer is not present and the deputy presiding officer will be deputizing in the absence of the presiding officer. We were further advised that the clerk is not present for the sitting, and there may be a need to cancel the sitting because the clerk is absent and therefore the sitting cannot continue. So we, as a responsible minority, also try to seek clarity and further advice on what we were being told, because we were also advised to hold on, a formal announcement will be made. But again, as a minority, a responsible minority, we started making calls. We called the parliament, we called different persons who are part of this house to inquire if the fact is the clerk is not here, if the house really requires to be suspended. So, Madam Presiding Officer, one of the advice that we got in our conversation is actually to communicate to the Deputy Presiding Officer. So we were on our way to communicate to the Deputy Presiding Officer to inquire what is really happening. And then we heard that the Deputy Presiding Officer came to the house, and because we were outside, we were not allowed to come back in. So again, it is disingenuous, Madam Presiding Officer, to say that we were not here. Madam
Members,
Presiding
I'm
Officer,
trying to hear the minority's contribution. Continue.
the unfolding of the events at the 15th plenary sitting has caused burning questions from many Tobagonians. And again, I am happy with some of the accounts of the Deputy Presiding Officer, because some of the questions of the public is, what really occurs in the preparation for a sitting? This significant and the single most important event of this house for the month, Tobagonians are asking, how does the Assembly legislature prepare for a sitting? And what stood out to many Tobagonians is that there may be some lack of communication, leadership, and management, because it is troubling to think that only moments prior to the sitting that it was observed that the clerk is not present on the day of the sitting, Madam Presiding Officer. That is unacceptable. So who manages what is happening? Who decides, or who? To me, there should be communication about ensuring things are in place, everything is in place for the setting. So to my mind, Madam Presiding Officer,
Continue.
the absence of the clerk should have been known, or ought to have been known, earlier than the accounts. And Madam Presiding Officer, because things are being managed, then the chief administrator, as the Deputy Presiding Officer would have indicated, should have been contacted and arrangements should have been put in place. We shouldn't be ready to come out and then finding out that the clerk is not here. Madam Presiding Officer, that is unacceptable, and in the view of the minority and many Tobagonians, it is irresponsible. So, Madam Presiding Officer, one of the questions, again, that some Tobagonians are asking is, when did we recognize that the clerk was not in the house? Madam Presiding Officer, what was put in place to ensure that with the absence of the clerk, the business of this house was dispensed with? Madam Presiding Officer, Tobagonians are asking in this particular matter, what was the role of the Chief Administrator in all that occurred? What was the role of the Leader of Assembly Business? What was the role of the Secretary, the Chief Secretary, as well as the Deputy Chief Secretary in all that would have transpired? And, Madam Presiding Officer, it is recognized, or it can be seen, that there is some sort of breakdown in communication. And this administration, Madam Presiding Officer, continues to make history. History on this island of Tobago. And Madam Presiding Officer, the history that is being made is not in a positive light. And once again, this administration has demonstrated an inability to govern. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to refer to the statement of the Deputy Presiding Officer on the day in question. And the Deputy Presiding Officer would have quoted Section 67 of the THA Act. And it says, and he read, additionally, Section 67, and this is in part, Section 67 of the THA Act 40 of 1996 says that the clerk shall keep in proper form a record of the proceedings of each meeting of the Assembly. In the absence, and this is the Deputy Presiding Officer continuing, in the absence of the clerk, no one is so legally authorized to keep a proper recording of the proceeding of today's sitting. And Madam Presiding Officer, notwithstanding the statement of the Deputy Presiding Officer on that day, the minority leader would have demonstrated that in this said house, under the same administration, in this same sitting, that there were 2 instances where the clerk was absent and the house continued because another member of staff deputized in the absence of the clerk. So, Madam Presiding Officer, again, Tobagonians are asking questions. So how is it that the absence of the clerk at the 4th sitting and the 8th sitting did not prevent the House from convening, but on the 15th sitting, the absence of the clerk caused the business of the people and the business of this House not to occur? And Madam Presiding Officer, what Tobagonians are also saying, that the circumstances surrounding the collapse of the 15th sitting has demonstrated how uncaring this administration really is. Because a senior member of staff, it was indicated, did not show up, did not call, did not report, and with the response given by the, or in the statement rather, given by the Deputy Presiding Officer, there seemed to be no empathy that the senior member of staff wasn't here. We didn't hear from the person. There was no empathy, no care, and the Deputy Presiding Officer just alluded to the fact that they threw the clerk under the bus. So somebody, a senior member of staff on a very important day, did not show up, and you didn't even care about what happened to that senior member of staff. Madam Presiding Officer, that is appalling. And as Tobagonians, we pride ourselves as a caring people and a caring society. And on the day of that sitting, care wasn't demonstrated. Empathy wasn't demonstrated. The well-being of the member who was absent or the employee who was absent was not demonstrated. And Again, we beg to ask the question, what was the real reason why the House wasn't convened? What was the real reason? And Tobagonians are asking the question, and up to this point in time, we have not received a plausible answer why the sitting had to collapse. Because precedent was set where, in the absence, someone deputized, and the people of the business of the people and the business of the House continued. And Madam Presiding Officer, I want to go back again to the Deputy Presiding Officer's statement. And in his opening statement to honorable members, he stated that the delay in the starting of today's sitting was owing to the fact that the clerk of the House did not turn up for duty, and that was done without any notification to the presiding officer or to the deputy presiding officer. Madam Presiding Officer, the statement further indicated that the standing orders were silent on what to do in the absence of the clerk. And Madam Presiding Officer, notwithstanding that the deputy said that on the day of the collapse and of this sitting, we are fully aware that this administration knows what to do when the standing orders of the Assembly are silent on a matter, because it was the same members of this administration that were advising under the 6-6, because the standing orders were silent of the Assembly, to draw straws and to go to standing order 92 and refer to the standing orders of the House of Representatives. So how then you knew that when the standing orders of this House is silent, you could go there and draw straws? But in this instance, you refuse to go to the standing orders of the House of Representatives, when you indicated, Madam Presiding Officer, in your statement that the standing orders is silent. A lot more questions than answered. And the question still remains, what is the real reason for the collapse of the 15th sitting? So, Madam Presiding Officer, the minority leader would have demonstrated what is required when the standing order, in particular this one as it relates to the clerk, is silent. And the standing orders in the House of Representatives would have defined who the clerk, or defined the clerk, as well as the practice in the absence of the clerk. So, Madam Presiding Officer, the inability to convene the sitting, the 15th sitting on March 23rd, 2023, has brought this House into public odium. And it was indeed an embarrassing incident. Madam Presiding Officer, some commentators have even gone as far as to call the actions on that day treason. And this assembly that was once held in high esteem have become a laughingstock of the people of Tobago, Trinidad, and the region, because this made regional news. And we see that there is a lack of transparency, accountability, a lack of respect, a lack of leadership and governance, and a growing level of mistrust among the people. And in this regard, Madam Presiding Officer, the minority is therefore calling for a comprehensive, independent investigation into the collapse of the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature. And we see this as necessary to uphold the rule of law and to address any legal implications that may arise due to the collapse of the sitting. We also see this as a way to ensure accountability and transparency, as well as to prevent any future incidents such as this in the future. So, Madam Presiding Officer, we believe that this issue has to be addressed head-on, and it will go a long way in restoring public confidence. So additionally, Madam Presiding Officer, by examining the circumstances thoroughly, we in this House can be able to take appropriate actions to rectify the situation, implement whatever policies are required to strengthen the functioning of this assembly. Madam Presiding Officer, the minority is calling for an investigation into the circumstances of March 23rd, 2023, the collapse of the 15th sitting. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Chief Secretary and Secretary for Finance, Trade and the Economy.
Thank you very much, Madam Presiding Officer. You know, it wasn't an intention of mine to speak on this motion because I'm of the view, just as the member for Point Bonaccord, that this motion is ill-placed, that this motion is ill-advised. As a matter of fact, everything about the motion is sick. But I keep hearing a repetition of flawed reasoning, flawed arguments, false information, notwithstanding the fact that I believe the Assistant Secretary, Sampson, as he puts it, was lucidly clear. On the day of this sitting, unlike the member for Roxborough Argyle, I gave notice of my absence. As a matter of fact, let me put on Hansard record that the only member of this House who absents himself and continues to be absent without giving any notice is a member of Roxborough Argyle. And he's also the only member of this House who, up to this point, have never spent an entire sitting in this House. But I guess his priorities are now about being mayor in Port of Spain. An election call, so he has election business to do in Trinidad, so let him run go. He can continue to sell out Roxborough and Tobago for Port of Spain. But back to the substantive motion at hand. I heard the member, the Deputy Presiding Officer, indicate clearly that no notice, no prior notice was given for the absence of the clerk of the House prior to the time of the sitting. Attempts were made to get on to the clerk, and no one got on to her, and an official line of communication only came through after he adjourned the sitting. Madam Presiding Officer, it could have easily been assumed that the clerk, who perhaps wasn't here in the morning, would have turned up for a sitting at 1:30 p.m. And so I could very well see why no alarm was raised earlier. But the material fact that guides what transpired is the fact that, as the minority councillor said it, communication was not had. And I don't want to assume why communication didn't happen with those responsible. I don't want to assume that. However, I want to say clearly that it is improper for this House to enter into an investigation that actually leads to investigating the clerk of the House. If the clerk acted inappropriately, if the clerk violated the terms of her employment as a public servant, the person, in my humble view, and in the legal view, that ought to trigger the investigation and treat with the matter is the chief administrator. That's the law. Not this House. Further, I heard the clerk I heard the deputy presiding officer, and he could have fooled me. I thought he was a lawyer because he demonstrated good understanding, not just of the legal opinion he got, but how things ought to happen. The deputy presiding officer stated a short while ago that when we look at how a clerk is selected in Tobago versus how a clerk is selected in Trinidad, that there are two different methods. And while the standing order is silent on what to do, both standing order and the law is silent on what to do if both the presiding officer and the clerk are absent. The THA Act is very clear as to the roles, functions, and who should appoint the clerk of the House. And because the THA Act, not the standing order, because the THA Act defines the clerk of the House and the clerk's function in a particular way, no standing order, not even the one in Port of Spain, can supersede Act 40 of 1996. I sat and I listened clearly as the deputy presiding officer schooled us all on how this thing ought to work. And somehow that is just being ignored. I go further, Madam Presiding Officer. I'm also certain that the deputy presiding officer said that he did not get the benefit of legal advice in the moment. And I will say, in my opinion, there is one major mistake, well, I wouldn't say major, but one mistake that the deputy presiding officer made on that day, which is, in my opinion, the deputy presiding officer should not have adjourned the sitting himself. He should have called on the leader of government business to adjourn the sitting as opposed to adjourning it himself. However, he is correct in saying that the 2 minutes and change constitutes a meeting of the House. As a matter of fact, we could have easily met here today and decided as a body, before we even debated this motion, that we were going to adjourn the sitting. And this sitting will in fact count as a sitting. A meeting is not counted only when all of the items on the order paper are dispatched with. A meeting is counted once the presiding officer or the deputy presiding officer calls the House to order. So a meeting, in fact, did happen. It did not collapse. It was adjourned. And I am of the opinion, I am no lawyer, but I am of the opinion that the adjournment should have been done through the leader of government business. That's my opinion. But I am not going to beat up on the deputy presiding officer for that, because if he did not have legal advice, and he decided, notwithstanding not having legal advice, he is here as deputy presiding officer. The presiding officer saying she had no prior notice that the clerk will be absent. Everybody's scrambling, trying to call the clerk to see who is present, what arrangements were made. Did you talk to anybody? No answer. And for good reason. The clerk could have been incapacitated and could not answer. I don't know, right? I don't know. As I said, it's not my place to make that judgment from here. I don't know. But got no response from the clerk. The chief administrator was contacted. She said, well, I know. Nobody told me anything. Nobody told me that the clerk would be absent. And so I had no conversation with anybody else about acting in the place of the clerk. And yes, the person who will most likely act or call upon to act will be a junior public servant. If the public servant was of a higher range or more seniority, more than likely that public servant would have already been in this place as clerk instead. So naturally, the person who will act will be someone with some less years of experience and so on. All of that was explained. But then there's another thing that we're not paying attention to. Imagine if at 1:30 p.m., no clerk, and we lay hands on somebody's surrender and say, you are to be the clerk today. How does that work for that public servant? Because this is a specialist area. In fact, In fact, I am of the view that, like what happens in the House of Representatives, where the clerk and the deputy clerk are considered to be in a stream separate and apart from the rest of the public service, where people kind of get to grow up in the institution and get institutional knowledge. I wish that was the case here in Tobago. What we do is that the moment this current clerk steps out, the chief ad will go through the system with the director of HR, and they will find whoever is the next most senior person on island, and that is the person who gets promoted. And that person might never have any experience in this job and have to learn it from scratch. And that's an unfortunate construct that we have. I cannot take my seat without also saying that, and this is something I spoke about since last year, we have several positions in the public service already classified by cabinet, so cabinet did their part. The next part is for the service commission to do. And service commissions go, service commissions come, and they're just not doing it. I met, well, rather the CPO office, the Chief Personnel Officer. I met Madam President Officer with the Public Service Commission last year. We had a big meeting in Magdalena, the entire board come up. We sat. I went through, I said, oh gosh, you're stymieing our work. And I raised then at Magdalena that meeting, I said, if something should really happen at the last minute, God forbid, what if the clerk is on her way to the house and she just can't get here? God forbid there's an accident. No deputy clerk since 2004. Since 2004. And on top of that, Madam Presiding Officer, it's only since we have been in office in February this year, when we felt like we just waiting on the CPO, waiting, and I took the position, we can't wait no more. And I said, let the executive create a contract position called Deputy Presiding Officer. Have it, sorry, Deputy Clerk, or Assistant Clerk rather, that was the name we gave it, Assistant Clerk, and let the legislator advertise for the position or make a lateral movement for somebody on contract, because the THA is authorized to contract services and for employment, even especially in instances where there's a dearth in the system, there's a gap in the system. Only February this year this has happened. This THA, this current modern THA, has sat like this month after month since 1996, since December of 1996. Mr. Hochoy Charles came, Mr. Orville London came, Mr. Kelvin Charles came, Mr. Ansel Dennis came, a series of executives, and nobody addressed it. Nobody addressed it. And so we are forced to have a stopgap measure, which is a contracted arrangement. When really and truly a position was classified since 2004, we should not have been in this position at all. And that brings me to another point, because I hear some has-beens trying to be relevant, trying to find relevance in this space, talking about who they train and who they ain't train. Who they train can't sit in as clerk at the house. No regular contract officer could just get up and say, I am acting as clerk at the house today. They won't have the standing to do that. The person's job spec as per their contract doesn't allow them to act as clerk at the house. And until the executive, and in this case, the ball is now in the court of the Assembly Legislature, until the Assembly Legislature advertise and get somebody who is so contracted to do that duty, there is no deputy clerk or assistant clerk. And, you know, many people are mixing up the roles of the executive and the legislature and mixing it up badly, very badly, and conveniently too. Because one of the things that happens for sit-ins, in case people don't know, we submit our motions, and as a matter of fact, the intent of this executive and this administration was to debate 2 motions in that month, in the month of March. 2. We were actually planning to debate 2 motions. That's why for the first time, 2 motions were on the order paper instead of 1. We appreciated and we expected that perhaps the first motion will take up some time and we wouldn't get to complete the second. But we placed the 2 motions on the order paper because I'd said since last year that notwithstanding the minimal staff we have, and there's another issue, the minimal staff we have, 1 or 2 Hansard and so on, we want to increase the number of sittings per month from 1, maybe at least 2. We don't have the kind of trained staffing to go a lot more than that. In the parliament in Trinidad, a sitting could end 2 o'clock in the morning and the next one start 8 o'clock the next day. They have staff that rotating, staff on shift for Hansard. We don't have that here. We don't have that here. And that speaks to a bigger question of how ready we are as an island for this autonomy thing and a greater, bigger house. Because all of those things have to be addressed administratively. Should the THA have to have 2 houses? As was proposed in at least one of the proposals that went down to Trinidad from Tobago. I think they call it the People's House. If we are to really do that, we will need the suitably qualified staff and more of it. We just have 2, and I have known these 2 ladies for donkey years. Well, not for donkey years, because I only here since 2017. I only here since 2017. Same 2 people I know. The person who dealing with pensions and so on here, the good little lady might be well advanced in her 70s by now. Retired long time. That's the nature of the legislature that we have. And so I will be first in line to say that the legislature that we have is not properly and fully configured. But as an executive, we submit our motions to the House. Sometimes they get back a little note from the clerk saying, the motion improper, we write it, she taking out this word, and I don't always vex, because I just feel sometimes she watering down the thing. I'll be honest. And she'll send it back, or sometimes, you know, you want to do some things and you send your notice through the clerk to the presiding officer. That's the general stream. The clerk notifies the presiding officer of the correspondence that comes in, like every other member. But as an executive, we don't run what happened inside the legislature at all. And perhaps, that is why staff could be taken on short term at the minority leader's office, and no note has come to executive council as yet, because at the end of the day, secretaries don't normally write notes. All of the minority is paid from out of the legislature. We don't interfere in the legislature business because there must be separation between the executive and the legislature. And so, to make it look as if it's the executive why the sitting did not happen is really very dishonest. There is a complete separation. The presiding officer, based on both the THA Act and the standing orders, have full authority here. You see, a little while ago, she could tell a member her ruling is final. Yes. Because the standing order even says that the presiding officer has the authority to interpret all the rules and regulations as she deems fit. And if the House has a problem with this presiding officer, we only have one option. And that is we have to sit as a House, vote and remove and put somebody else. That's the only option. We don't run this place. The executive doesn't run this place. And so when you see a former presiding officer trying to mislead Tobagonians into believing that somehow is the executive that's supposed to know that the clerk ain't gonna be there, that's supposed to know that if the clerk ain't there, somebody else has to deputize. That's not the job of the executive.
She has no idea.
That's not the job of the executive. I would say she doesn't have an idea. She's been deliberate in trying to mislead Tobagonians. Yes. Because she knows when she sat in that chair as presiding officer no executive ran that seat. She ran it. She knows that. She knows that.
Unless maybe she's admitting otherwise.
Unless she's saying she was there by proxy and the executive was running the show, telling she what to do, doing it for she and she does the face. And I am saying, but if this former presiding officer says she trained somebody here, how come a note never come from out of the legislature to a previous executive council asking for that person, for the position to be created first and that person to be appointed in a lateral way to that position? How come? This legislature does its own notes and send them up to exec. How come, since she trained somebody, how come she never do that? You see, Madam Presiding Officer, if hypocrisy had a color, it will be red. And if hypocrisy had a synonym, it will be PNM. And if hypocrisy had a face, it will look like that lady that turned purple. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, the request to have this House investigate what happened, even after the Deputy Chief Secretary was so clear, the Deputy Presiding Officer was so clear, pellucidly clear about the facts, and he placed on Hansard in the most careful manner what transpired, Madam Presiding Officer. This House doing an investigation is not warranted. It doesn't make any sense. And in fact, if we have to pass this motion, we should probably consider changing the resolution and saying that the presiding officer and deputy presiding officer must send reports to the chief administrator and let the chief administrator, based on delegated authority to her, commence an investigation process that will include selecting people to do the investigation, come up with a response, and then give the action. That is where this matter should go, not in this House. But you see, Madam Presiding Officer, sometimes things happen in this space and you wonder if it's just coincidence, or you wonder if it's planned, and one cannot underestimate the volume of wicked incompetence and deliberate wicked incompetence at that passes through this space called Tobago and passes through the public service generally speaking. And so one is forced to ask oneself, that the party was real? The not showing up and no announcement, was that pre-planned? All of these are questions to be asked. But it's not for this House to ask those questions. It's inappropriate, in fact, for this House to ask those questions. It's also inappropriate for this House to investigate the circumstances by which a clerk did not show up to the House and for duty. We have no locus standi on that matter. That is reserved for the only person on the island who has delegated authority, and as the chief administrator. And even if the chief administrator has to do this, she or he, because that's not quite clear yet, she or he will have to also notify the relevant authorities in Trinidad, inclusive but not limited to the Public Service Commission. That's not a business for this House. It's not a business for this House. And so the reason why the executive did not communicate anything, and I'll end on this point, because the Minority Council spoke about the lack of communication. The reason why the executive did not communicate anything about what transpired is because we were trying hardest, notwithstanding the false information in the space, to stay out of a conversation that really and truly should be led by the Assembly legislature. In fact, I sent a note to the presiding officer. I said to the presiding officer, why don't you let the legislature communication people put out a release? Because that should be addressed from the legislature, not the executive. We have no business with the day-to-day operations of the legislature, of the House. And sometime afterwards, she responded by saying that the advice she got is that because the legislature should try to not be in a political fray and to remain as neutral as possible, the advice she got is that if the legislature put out any statement, it will look as if it's all political. And that is why, I guess, they said nothing. But we avoided having this conversation publicly because, one, we didn't want to encroach on the rights, the responsibilities of the Assembly legislature. Two, we recognize from the details the Deputy Presiding Officer shared, we recognize early on that that matter really and truly should be resident with the Chief Administrator for investigation and action if and only if warranted thereafter. Because remember I said the clerk could have easily be preparing, close, done press and starch, and fall sick and can't leave home. That could be the circumstance. She could have been incapacitated to the point where she could not make a phone call, and by the time a phone call came through, it was at the juncture where the Deputy Presiding Officer had already called the House together and adjourned the sitting. So we're not making any judgments on exactly what happened and why the clerk moved the way she moved. In fact, it would be highly inappropriate for us to do so. But I will say this, the legislature, for it to become even more efficient, there is a requirement, Madam Presiding Officer, with all respect, there's a requirement that the age-old organizational structure that we have here, that must be changed. It must be updated. We can't have the same organizational structure we had from '96 or from 2001 or from 2013. It has to evolve to meet the demands. This House has evolved. This House is now 15 seats. And because they so thought that they could have rushed and increased the number of seats to win an election, that they didn't even do the thing properly. Because the quorum of the House remains 9. The quorum of the House remains 9. When we have 15 elected members, in addition to 4 councillors. So we have a total membership around this horseshoe of what, 19? 19 people around the horseshoe, and the quorum is still 9. Quorum didn't move. But that's another discussion for another time. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, respectfully to the minority leader and his motion, I appreciate that he provided an opportunity for us to give clear information on the matter, something that we resisted because we didn't want to come across as though we in legislative business. The legislature is supposed to respond. There, in my respectful view, Madam Presiding Officer, there is nothing that prevents the legislator at moments like this from putting out communications, public communications, so that it is very clear what happened. That is my view. Of course, you got advice otherwise, and you're free to take your advice. And, Madam Presiding Officer, finally, real respectfully, if there's need for an investigation, the investigation should be done rightfully and truthfully by the Chief Administrator, who has such remit in her powers as delegated. Thank you.
Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, it is quite unfortunate that every time this administration is found wanting, true to form, they throw, as the Deputy Presiding Officer said, they throw public servants under the bus. And I want to make a call to public servants today to take note, take copious note of this very troubling development, because it means today it is a clerk, but tomorrow, if found wanting in a division, it could be you. So make sure and dot your I's, cross your T's, because this administration, when found wanting and need a scapegoat, the easy suspect is a public servant who they know cannot defend themselves. Because here it is, in this debate, this administration has made the clerk the subject of this discussion, and the poor clerk doesn't even have the opportunity to respond and clear her name. This administration, understanding that the clerk cannot clear her name, is basically, as the deputy presiding officer clearly admitted, throwing the clerk under the bus. It's not my words, it's the deputy presiding officer.
Members, please allow the minority leader his 30 minutes of wrap-up time, please.
Madam Presiding Officer, it is their own colleague. And you see, we now get to realize that they like to sell out one another. They enjoy selling out one another. And it's the Deputy Presiding Officer, by his own admission, told all of Trinidad and Tobago that today they were throwing the clerk under the bus. That is not my words. That's the words of the presiding officer, deputy presiding officer. Madam Presiding Officer, but what is more comical? And I don't know, like we talked about a lack of communication. It seems that members on the other side, like some of them, don't speak to one another. Because here it is, I have the goodly councillor saying to us that Standing Order 11 was quoted when the presiding officer is absent. Announcement shall be made by the clerk of the house, and the deputy presiding officer will then take the chair and be vested with the powers of the presiding officer. That is the councillor reminding us of that procedure, and she basically hinted that that process could not have happened, which meant that the deputy presiding officer was not properly seated in the chair of deputy presiding officer because the clerk was absent to so conduct that exercise. But here it is, the deputy presiding officer, on the other hand, is saying to us that he basically would have done the functions that he is so vested with. So at what point was he appointed deputy presiding officer? Because you can't be fish and fowl. You can't say in one breath you're not recognizing the clerk, and in the other breath you are taking up functions to which only the clerk can vest. So here it is, we had no clerk, but all of a sudden we had someone sitting in the deputy presiding officer chair. Who appointed him? Who appointed the deputy presiding officer to sit in the chair on this occasion? So clearly, we have a situation, if we are to agree with the goodly councillor, that the deputy presiding officer was not so legally employed to sit in the chair and authorized to sit in the chair to even adjourn the House. And the Chief Secretary, by his own admission, did indicate such a process was flawed. But Madam Presiding Officer, before we go further, I also want to correct a wicked, dangerous, dishonest accusation of the Deputy Presiding Officer. Members here would have seen at 1:30 both the minority councillor and I were properly seated, ready to perform the business of the people. And for the Deputy Presiding Officer,
Members, it's now 4:30. According to Standing Order 16-2, we shall suspend. I know shall is a contentious word today.
Shall we suspend for the recess until 5? Can we put this to a vote, please? Secretary for Finance, Trade and the Economy.
Thank you, Madam President Officer. I beg to move that this House continue to sit until the business of the House is dispensed with.
Honorable members, the question proposed is that we remain seated until the minority leader has concluded his wrap-up. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Minority, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, as I was making the point that here it is, members all saw the minority team present, and the Deputy Presiding Officer could make the most scandalous kind of accusation. And in fact, it appears that he listed the members of this minority as absent. When we entered the chambers, we were present. He also saw us walk in as soon after as he made his declaration. And for him to indicate that we were absent seems to me, when I had conversations even with the leader of the Assembly business on this very matter, seems to me that they are attempting to shape the narrative. And to me, there's a clandestine kind of narrative that, and an undertone as to suggest there was some kind of collusion. So when the public here, the minority was absent, the clerk was absent, as to send some kind of shameless, shambolic kind of clandestine kind of arrangement. And this is quite unfortunate, because how could it be where everyone in here saw us present, patiently waiting to see what the decision would be, and this Deputy Presiding Officer would so shamelessly come to indicate and lie to the House to say that this minority was absent? Absolute untruth. Absolute. And if they can lie, because Mr. Manning used to say, if you can lie about the small things, just imagine when it comes to the big things. And we have to take a look at this administration. It's sad, it's unfortunate, and I think it deserves, the minority deserves an apology.
Madam Presiding Officer, I stand on Standing Order 44.5. A point of clarity, I did not say that they were absent, neither did I mention that they sent letters noting of the absence. I said they were outside of the House and not inside of the House. Right? If you are not, the House is in here where we are, not outside the doors. The House is in here. So there's a difference of being outside and being inside. If you are outside of the House, you are absent from the House.
Members?
They said you were absent. Come on, man. Yeah.
The debate is not about who was in the House, outside the House. Minority Leader, please continue with your presentation.
Madam Presiding,
Members, please allow the minority to conclude. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, you see, the substantive matter, as the Chief Secretary said, the substantive matter of this House that none of them addressed, and which is a fact, is that on 2 occasions in this very House, notwithstanding that the clerk was not present, the House met and dispensed of the business of the day. And I'm hearing there are so many contradictions with that, because in one breath they're saying it is only the chief administrator who can appoint someone to fulfill the duties of the clerk. But at the same time, the question has to be asked, on those 2 occasions, who appointed the junior staff to fulfill the duties of the clerk? And is this administration, because as I said, it cannot be fish or fowl, you have to choose one. So are they admitting that on those two occasions, the House were convened improperly? Or is it that they're saying they misinterpret what should have happened on this occasion? Because we have the precedent. The House by itself would have resolved itself because we created the precedent. And the precedent wasn't one time, it wasn't two times. In fact, it has even been done in previous administrations. So this matter is not about the clerk. This matter is about the House having a precedent and went ultra-virus to the precedent that we in fact created. We created the precedent. So how now you can move away from the precedent and argue that you have to get only the chief ad could appoint a clerk? We are not asking for a clerk to be appointed to carry out administrative function. The law is clear. All the clerk has to do in the House is basically make sure that whatever we dispense of today, there's records of that. So that is why if the clerk wants to go to the bathroom, so what are you telling me? That we have to stop the sitting and allow the clerk to go to the bathroom and then we come back? That is why previously on occasions, we had persons within the assembly, because all you have to do is ensure that the roll call happens and all the order of the business is dispensed. And in fact, I'm hearing the Chief Secretary talking about this, going and have this assistant clerk. But again, you're hearing the contradictions, because if you're saying in terms of the appointment of a clerk, which only a clerk currently the law speaks to, the law didn't speak to no deputy clerk, it didn't speak to any assistant clerk. So how now can you now say that you are going to create a contract position to now fill the role of a clerk if the clerk is absent? That is a contradiction of your own argument. So it's either we are appreciating that clerk means, in terms of the legal precedent as indicated in the Parliament, where junior staff will sit in, because the substantive clerk of the Parliament, I don't think any one of us have ever seen the clerk of the Parliament sit in the Parliament procedures. It is the junior staff that would sit in and do the order, the roll call. It is not the clerk. So to sit here and give the impression that you need a clerk physically here, to be here, to call, to start the day, is incorrect and improper. It is an incorrect interpretation. Because at the end of the day, Section 92, Standing Order 92.1 is clear. If we are going to adopt Standing Order 92.1, it means you adopt it in its truest meaning. And if whatever happens in the Parliament, therefore it needs to be transposed here, you cannot take half and leave the other. So if in the Parliament you can have junior staff, it also means if we, and the Deputy Presiding Officer said it, when he declared and adjourned the sitting, he said the laws and the standing orders are silent. And therefore, if that was the premise upon which he adjourned and made his decision, then we have standing orders that tells us what we do when the laws and the standing orders are in fact silent. It says you must revert to Standing Order 92. So once that is the premise, once that is the argument, once that is the basis upon which you are making a decision, then we have directive on how we treat with that. So to make this about the clerk and not understand that we had multiple infractions of interpretation by the Deputy Presiding Officer is for us to be blatantly blindsided, blatantly dishonest, and blatantly hypocritical. And I'm hearing the Chief Secretary talking about who is hypocritical. And I want to make this statement abundantly clear. Because here it is, you have a chief secretary trying to give the impression that a minority leader who received a letter, a correspondence that was sent to the leader of assembly business saying the previous minority had these 4 appointments.
Minority leader relevance.
Madam Presiding Officer, it is the minority, it is the Chief Secretary who raised the issue of my staff on his debate. So I'm just responding in respectful view. I'm just responding to what was said. So, so can I proceed?
Continue.
Thank you so much. Madam, so here you have Chief Secretary trying to give the impression that this minority leader acted in some improper way, some unlawful way, when I simply would have written to the relative bodies in the Assembly Legislature to fulfill what was the precedent. And the precedent was there were 4 positions afforded to the previous minority leader. And those are the 4 positions we would have adopted, in addition to the fact that we asked for a separate cleaner because we inherited this office during the height of COVID. And we are saying it does not make sense to have the person who is hospitality attendant dealing with persons coming into the office and at the same time have that person also interfacing with all the surfaces and that kind of thing. That just was not proper given the science of COVID and how persons were infected. And the Chief Secretary and the rest of us agreed in that meeting that that was in fact a consideration and that was approved and the staff was paid. But, Madam Presiding Officer, I want you to compare that to a voice recording that is out in the public space.
Minority leader.
Madam Presiding
Minority
Officer, I'm
leader.
comparing it because
Minority leader. This is the absolute last time I'm going to tell you you are out of order. Retract and continue.
Madam Presiding Officer, so
retract and continue.
I retract.
Thank you.
Madam Presiding Officer, so I just want the Chief Secretary to know that the people of Tobago understands who the real hypocrites are at this time. That is what I want the Chief Secretary to know. The people of Tobago understands who are the real hypocrites. They understand who made promises and who are not keeping their promises. They understand and they're seeing your administration for what you are and who you all really are. That is what is the crux of the matter here today. Madam Presiding Officer, as I wrap up, you know, I came here thinking that we as a house would really want to know the truth. But it seems as this administration enjoys covering things up. They enjoy being they don't like transparency. They don't like accountability. And it's for that reason why I now understand why the Chief Secretary does not want an independent investigation, because it's quite easy for them to come and blame the public servant who cannot defend herself, and it's quite easy for them to deflect when the matter is, the evidence is, on 2 occasions, we came here as a house, the clerk was absent for whatever reason, and we dispensed the business of the house. On that fateful day, on May 23rd, 2023, we also came to the house, the clerk was absent, but on that fateful day, for some reason, and with some kind of advice and interpretation, the deputy presiding officer decided to adjourn the house, and that is the fact of the matter. And at this point, I believe this house and the people of Tobago deserves an independent investigation that can unearth the truth and will also afford even the public servant to have a say in a way that would be fair and in a way that would be transparent. Madam Presiding Officer, you know, and I'll hear the name calling. I appreciate the fact that there are only 2 members here seriously about treating with Tobago's business. And therefore, I understand that we will be attacked. I understand we will be laughed at. But I know for a fact that the people of Tobago, they are paying attention. They are taking notice. And the people of Tobago at this point, they are simply waiting to exhale. Because this has been total embarrassment. It has been shameful. It has been disgraceful. And Tobagonians just can't wait to get rid of this nightmare. I thank you.
Honorable members, the question put is, whereas Section 65(1) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2503 provides that the Assembly shall hold an ordinary meeting at least once every month, or as often as its business may require. And whereas on March 23, 2023, there was an embarrassing collapse of the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature, and whereas the House was adjourned in violation of the standing orders and based on patently erroneous evidence that the clerk's absence precluded the House from convening, and whereas this collapse resulted in a flagrant breach of the law, bringing this most august House into public odium and exposure to legal challenge, be it resolved that this House conducts a comprehensive investigation into the circumstances which caused the reprehensible incident which occurred during the 15th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature on March 23, 2023. And be it further resolved that this investigation be completed no later than June 30, 2023, and laid in this Assembly at the earliest sitting thereafter. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any against? The noes have it. Motion denied. Clerk?
Laugh and cry live at the same place. Laugh and cry.
Motion for adjournment.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I beg to move that this House now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Honorable members, the question is that this House now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed. Good afternoon, members.